Here again, and today I'm going to show you a bit about our future ports in Mozambique and then the eastern parts of South Africa. And I'll talk about Cape Town on another day, and the Western Cape, which is a whole other part of this great country here. But I want to remind that I will have a discussion in the Voyager Lounge at 3:30 after we finish the talk, so that I hope to see you there if you have more questions. But what I'm going to show you today is just that we are, as you know, coming down off of Madagascar down into the Mozambique Strait, which at its widest about 300 sea miles across. But we have 2 full sea days to go down to Maputo, which is again along the long and tropical coast of East Africa. And then as we come down into South Africa, the news is it's going to be balmier and cooler as it is as we go south. But you can see this satellite view of Africa, the sub-Saharan Africa. It sort of looks like a lemur to me. Look at that blinking eye. That's Lake Victoria. But this whole area has temperate forests on the shores of South Africa, and then the great Kalahari Desert, and then the further deserts of Namibia up on the west coast of South Africa going up toward Angola. And this is a whole other side of Africa, quite different from where we are. Well, we'll be going to Mozambique, and Maputo is actually in the very southmost part of this coastal country. And it is bordered by Zimbabwe, Tanzania, Malawi, Zambia, and South Africa. And I was reading about this in African history. They call these borders the geographic scars of politics, because they were drawn, as Philip Hearst described, by the colonial powers willy-nilly to what the indigenous people and languages are. And even Mozambique, this 1,000 miles of coastal country, has many different groups in isolation from each other than the coast. And then there are the great rivers that come into that area, the Zambezi and the Limpopo. Maputo, though, is right down in the base of the country, founded as a capital of Portuguese Mozambique. And again, Mr. Hearst gave a description of the Portuguese Empire with these trading fortresses all up and down the African coast all the way to Asia. Well, I know that a lot of you are not going ashore in Maputo for various reasons. Maybe you've seen enough tropical cities by now, and also the problem is it's a very underdeveloped country with very few buses and taxis and things like that. So I'll just show you a little bit of it from my own time there. It is on a bay, and it is on a sort of a semi-peninsula with an old grid city laid out by the Portuguese. And this was a very small place before the Portuguese settled there, built a fort, and now it's grown into a city of a couple million people after the Independence War, then the Civil War, and then it's only been in the last couple of decades that they've begun to get their economy back together. They've had a lot of investment from China. They've had some oil research there. So suddenly it's a boom town like we saw in Dar es Salaam, with people coming in from the countryside, a certain amount of foreign business there. It's fringed with this lovely park overlooking the sea, but otherwise it's a vast flat city like Dar es Salaam. And even if you don't go ashore, you'll be able to take a look at it from the dock. This is the center city on the south shore, where there's still some of the old colonial era buildings, and the business district is further in, and then there's residential areas out to the north that are somewhat more prosperous than what we'll see if you get off the ship. Now, a lot of you know did not want to just pay the extraordinary visa cost to come out and look at this, so I'll show you a bit of it. This is the Portuguese fort near the east side of the city, with its cannons still in place, and the military museum. As you know, the Portuguese were essentially driven out. There were 200,000 or more that left Mozambique and left their buildings and their businesses, and it's had a very hard time just maintaining anything. There was a lot of damage in the city during the fighting, not with the Portuguese as much as between the factions that fought for 3 years over control of the capital and the control of the country. So there are a lot of trading buildings and houses, warehouses that are still abandoned right downtown, and it's not a very happy sight, but it's slowly getting itself in a new era, let's say. But last time I was there, the streets were flooded. There had been the river flooded, and you couldn't even cross into the parts of the city in the old town, which is on the lowlands. That's why they built most of the rest of the new town up in the hills just above. This is the beautiful train station built by the French engineer Eiffel, which has been restored and is sort of the symbol of the city. Now that's 10-minute walk from where our dock is. Here's the old, one of the government offices, which is now the National Library in the Portuguese style. There's an Independence Plaza, which features a number of landmarks. Particularly this one is the Praça de Trabalhadores, which is the workers' plaza, which was named by the new revolutionary government. But it's actually a monument to colonial troops that fought in various wars against the local people. But they have this, it's a very strong-looking woman on top, and wouldn't want to ask her why she's holding a cobra. But that's right next to the modernistic Catholic cathedral, which was one of the last things built by the Portuguese. This is one of the old clubhouses, which is now the French cultural mission for Mozambique. And this is another building that was built by Eiffel, the iron building, all a prefabricated sheet iron construction, which has to be the most hottest building in the world if you have the climate like Maputo. And that's also a historic monument for one of his lesser works. And scattered around the old town, you can still see some of the monuments that the Portuguese built. This was one as a monument to the first settlers that went inland to set up plantations. But the revolutionary government has tore down all of the statues of the Portuguese era and replaced them with this one, for instance, in Samora Machel, who was the leader of the fringed party that was leading in the revolutionary war against the Portuguese. Now his government continues on. This is the Mozambique flag with the hoe and that famous symbol of peace and prosperity, the AK-47. And so you can still see this sort of, I call the hangover of revolution all over town, slogans and posters and such. But they are now quasi-democratic, like a lot of African countries. So Frelimo is still the major party, and they have a few contestants to their control. But it is essentially still run by the military, which hold peace in this country together, lest it break apart like others. And again, you heard Mr. Hurst's description of the difficulties of maintaining stability in all these African countries. Here's one of the period murals you can see in Maputo of the fight. And then when they finally came to a political settlement, they disarmed the populace. And one of the curious crafts that they did is they took apart the mechanisms of the guns and made lawn furniture. Now, isn't that just what you want to take home as a souvenir from Africa? Well, you need a pretty big cushion to sit on a magazine of a AK-47. Well, anyway, the people are exuberant because they knew such war, and there was probably about 1 million Mozambicans who were killed during the extended 20 years of war, first against the Portuguese, then amongst themselves. And so now they have bread and semi-prosperity, but they are poor cousins to South Africa, which has not known a full civil war like this for all of its troubles I'll get to. But so the Mozambicans are particularly cheerful, and they're mostly speaking a Portuguese patois. They have various African languages that have all been melded in, especially in Maputo, to a sort of a Creole Portuguese. Here's a candy poster. Dal melhor internet. So it's, if you speak Portuguese, you'll feel at home because you can talk to everybody. And some of the old colonial buildings are still in good shape, like the train station. This is the municipal market, which is like the ones we've been seeing. They're an iron construction, open air. This may have also been built by Eiffel, his design. And it's full of the fish and this is cassava, which is a staple of African food. The jackfruit. Now, we've been seeing these sort of things for quite a while already. This is an area with a very remnant Muslim population because, again, the Arab traders came all the way down here, though it was quite far considering all the rest of the Swahili coast. But above all, they've had a population boom, and again, the town seems to be full of country people, and particularly young men come to look for some sort of work. But I'd say they're on the typical sort of wondering what to do today stage, and many of them live on the bare earnings of just selling a little bit to whoever is going by. The trouble of Africa, that there isn't enough economy to really give anybody prosperity, except for the leaders. And on this new building there, they say, mais para todos, which means more for everybody, which has got to be the symbol, the slogan of socialism, that it's a great way to run a country till somebody's money runs out. But anyway, you can see also on the side that building that was wrecked during the war. So all around, you walk around Maputo, it looks like it's a city that is scarred almost everywhere you go. And then between the floods and the lack of repair, the place is a fairly sad city, like this building that is now right downtown, but it is lived in by squatters. And so it has this kind of a forlorn look in other places. But everywhere you'll get music. I was just playing music by Mariam Makiba, who's the famous singer from Mozambique who was in exile for decades. But I've been playing various music as we're going along. But the joy of African music is, as they say, we sing and dance because otherwise we would cry. But even Maputo has this sort of stop-and-start boomtown going on. Right across from the ruins of that former colonial building, there's this new tower going up. And a lot of this is the oil businesses come in, and also Chinese trading and such. So here's this advertisement for a new building that says, if you have your business here, you will have arrived at the top. And you can look down on all the rest of it, let's say. But then there were designs for even more office plazas. And so this is the irony of Africa. It is still very poor, but it's also booming in certain ways in certain places. We'll see these new apartment blocks as we come in and out, and that's the other side of downtown, which is quite prosperous. And then there's out in the countryside, there's sort of vast lowlands. And I put this picture up because the traditional Mozambique house is probably more comfortable with that high peak roof that gets a little air through it than having a condominium on the high apartment house in Maputo, which is not so warm and convenient when there's no electricity for air conditioning or to go up the elevator. So that's why ground floor apartments are preferred. But a lot of people are living like this. So that's the problem of Mozambique and Africa in general. Out on the shore, and there's, as I say, 1,000 miles of beaches all the way up to Dar es Salaam, and there are a few colonial houses and resorts there now, and the life along the shore. Inland, it gets very riverine, and this is the Limpopo River, far to the north of Maputo. That's the major river that flows out from Uganda, and also the Zambezi River flows from Zimbabwe. But it's lowlands with agriculture and dense forests and wildlife up there. Now, you can see Mozambique on the upper right-hand corner. Maputo's right there in the corner, so within 50 kilometers is Swaziland, which is part of South Africa. And then the South African coast has shallow lowlands along a mountain rise. The higher area there, over 2,000 meters, is Lesotho. That's one of the native homelands that has its own king and government all through the period of apartheid in South Africa. And then north is Johannesburg, the Great Orange River that flows all the way to the west coast, and then the Cape Town, of course, in the lower left-hand corner. But I'll talk about that another day. I'm just going to show you where we're going now. So this is the political map showing, again, Maputo in the right corner, Swaziland, Lesotho. We will be going to Richards Bay and then to Durban. Now, they are both in KwaZulu-Natal, which is a major state of South Africa, and very densely populated compared to some of the desert areas or the inland areas. So you can see the rivers flowing to the sea and the other independent homelands, they're called. And Pretoria, the capital, and Johannesburg right near it, that's the heart of the economy, especially the mining economy and the political economy of South Africa. And one writer just described South Africa and its nature. If nature here wishes to make a mountain, it runs for 500 miles. And if nature wants a plain, it is levels 8 of them at once. And if a rock, it tilts 5,000 feet of strata on end. Our skies are higher and more intensely blue, our waves are larger, and our rivers fiercer, which might also add the addendum, the people are also that way. Where we're going to be going in KwaZulu land, this is, of course, the great hero. If you haven't seen the movies or bought the action figure, this is King Shaka Zulu, who unified his people and conquered all of the other surrounding peoples back in the early 1800s. Now, he was dubbed a great military leader because he was able to maintain discipline in vast armies, 50,000 warriors at a time, to attack other areas and fight the British in particular, and the Boers, the Dutch Afrikaners also, in a number of battles. And his key innovation for his tribesmen is that he shortened the throwing spear to a attack hand-to-hand combat knife, sort of like the Roman legions did. They would get in and were more effective head-on. But what he did is he had his warriors attack in the front, and then he would have a pincer movement and surround his enemy and vanquish them, which he did famously at the battle with the British at Islandera. But meanwhile, that's made the Zulu nation, they're going to be the strongest nation in all of Africa, and centered right near Durban in the area where we will be going, and you'll see them. And they've had battles over the Hossa land, which was near the Cape Colony, which had been, of course, originally the Dutch settlement, and then the British. So I'll go into that history more when I talk about the Cape Colony and Cape Town another day. But in Natal, that was finally became plantation land for growing cotton, especially in the Zulu, when they had to submit to the British finally. They became workers on the plantations. A lot of them refused. That's when they began bringing in Indian labor and some Islamic peoples from up the coast to come work, because the Zulus to this day are very proud, and they still have their king, Goodwill Zwelithini. And he has his royal palace and his many, many wives north of Durban. They're not in the cities. And so they are a people with a, let's say, continuing culture that have, they're agricultural. They are farmers, and then they raise cattle. So they have an agricultural base, and then they have, let's say, a very elaborate ceremonial and cultural life. We'll see this if you take the trip up to the Zululand tour from the ship. I particularly like the married women have a very elaborate headdress, which you can buy one for your tribal activities at home, if you like. They live in these thatched beehive houses, which are actually quite cool and comfortable. And again, if you go up to the Thousand Hills area, you'll get to see the village that is still in traditional format, though. You'll notice that a lot of them are living in split-level ranch houses with double garages now. But nonetheless, they still have their intact family structures with the local chiefs and then their king. And this is actually that place where you go. You can see the dancing and the presentations that they have of war-like animals, sort of like the Maori. They're very exuberant in their dancing and drumming and displays, whether they're actually having any battles now. But here's one of the ladies of that area, and here's one of the healers, and specializing in herbal medicine. That's the paint. They paint the face as a symbol of their knowledge. And here's one of them, the Sangoma. That's the name of the Zulu healers and soothsayers, which have their traditional life to this day. But the Zulu are, again, love this displays like they did with Shaka Zulu, their spears and their knives and their fur swords. And you can, gentlemen, you can go get a setup like this for our next formal night. And so I'd say they're among the most exuberant people we will have met on this whole trip. One of the ceremonies that they do in the spring is for all the young people to dress in straw, and they dance around, particularly the young women, and the king typically chooses the best dancer to join his harem. The men also get painted up and get prepared for their puberty circumcision like the women do. They also have circumcision for the women, which you know about. But that's a very deep custom among the Zulu and is a controversy right now. The men, though, are supposed to go out and catch a bull, and that's their rite of passage. To the north of the Zulu is the Mbele people, who were conquered by the Zulu, but still have their area between Durban, Natal, and the coast, and Johannesburg. And they are famous for the rings on their neck, their colorful paintings of their houses, which are still there, and their particular way of ceremonial dress. They don't do this that much anymore because it's hard to go to the office carrying all your gold with you every time you go. But that's the ultimate source of hip-hop bling, I think. Here's a younger woman who does not have the rings on her neck or her feet, so she can be an auto mechanic. So there you go. That's modern Africa, South Africa in particular. You got this very distinct peoples. There are about 11 different major peoples of South Africa, including the Afrikaners and the other Europeans. But you have heard this history of apartheid and the difficulty. There are many battles between all of them into history, but just the recent decades have seen the conflict of apartheid. When at a certain point, the South African government, we cannot solve these racial problems. We just have to separate people. That's what apartheid means. And so they, starting over 100 years ago, they put in pass laws. You had to have a registered address and stay in your homeland. You were not allowed out of your area to go anywhere else unless you had work papers. So here's a police officer checking one. And they would be imprisoned if they were repeat offenders and not obeying the pass laws. And then it was segregation to an extreme level, in that the country was completely divided, and even between the different black groups, they were not allowed in each other's homeland. And so this was a very painful political process which separated everybody in the whole country. You see Lesotho and Swaziland, they were independent kingdoms of their own peoples, but everybody else was kept off the other lands and put into a homeland. And particularly the Afrikaner farmers had the best farmland and would only bring in labor for the day, let's say. But this led to the conflicts you certainly remember in the news. Sharpsville, a big massacre in 1960 when there were protesters, and then constant resistance all over the country, and oppression of anyone who was rebellious. And so the prisons filled up, most famously with Nelson Mandela, who was a lawyer and was trying to go through legal means to address the issues of apartheid. And he did not join the guerrilla groups that were terrorists attacking the army and police, but he was accused anyway, was put in Robbins Island in Cape Town for over 20 years. And then finally, with the international pressure of trade sanctions and all that you may remember, the President de Klerk began negotiations to try to settle this whole issue and come to some compromise, because even the best students were opposed to this. Business interests were opposed to it finally because of economic restrictions. And just in a human rights basis, this could not really go on without some sort of change. And so the 85% black population finally were so rebellious that it came to massacres again and mass imprisonment, and it just could not go on this way while the rest of the world could see it on TV. So finally, this is Premier Botha, who negotiated with some of the leaders of the different parts of the the black community, and then they came to the end of apartheid, released Nelson Mandela, who was then, with the first free elections, elected president of the nation. And so you will see his image everywhere, because the one thing that he did after spending over 20 years in jail is he said, we cannot have revenge for the injustice because it will only lead to more injustice. So the new Constitution of South Africa meant there was gender and racial equality guaranteed, and he almost personally stamped out the, let's say, the radicals in the African National Congress and others who wanted to appropriate businesses and land for the blacks from the whites. So you'll see images like this where he was the man for all seasons and could do no wrong and could wear so many hats, let's say. And then when he died, they had a funeral and memorials for him. This is the one that's near Durban. which you can go see on one of the excursions, is where he was captured by the police. And it's a metal sculpture that is, as you turn, it is a sort of a living portrait of him. And so that is the grandfather of the country, now just recently deceased. The current president, Jacob Zuma, who was also with the ANC, was not Mandela's choice to be his successor, and he's had a lot of controversy. For instance, when he went to Mandela's funeral, he was booed by the participants because he's a famously corrupt and inept president in various ways, and has a giant compound up near Johannesburg where he has his 6 wives and a vast estate. And he's typical of the new elite that have, from the revolutionary times, taken over the government services. And now there's a joke in South Africa because of the constant blackouts and brownouts of electricity. What was there before we had candles? Well, it was electricity. And so his complaints about him are many. And then he has opposition within his party, the ANC. And this is the current issue in the news nowadays of Julius Malema, who was the head of the African National Congress Youth Party, and then was kicked out of the ANC for advocating appropriation of white-owned farmlands and socialize more industries. And he is currently, as of tomorrow, appearing in court being accused of fraud in his own personal finances. But his movement is called the Economic Freedom Movement, which is, again, a sort of revolutionary movement to finally get economic justice for the majority that are so poor. But the underlying problem with all of this is the demographics, because, as I put up here, the population of South Africa has just ballooned over the last century. So 1910, there were 6 million, then 9 million, 16 million. 1985 was only 38 million. Now it's over 55 million, it's estimated. Plus, there are millions of refugees who come in from all the surrounding African countries to look for work, because relatively South Africa is a prosperous country compared to Mozambique and Zimbabwe and refugees from wars elsewhere. And so whatever the politics are, they have to manage this kind of population explosion. And this is what the Kenyan writer Wangari Maathai said: this is the elephant in the room nobody wants to talk about, because as the African population booms, the wildlife, the arable land, the resources are just stretched thinner than they are already. And so the problem is pervasive. South Africa's growth in population is far less than ones like Angola, or Mozambique, Nigeria. So it's estimated there'll be about 500 million more Africans in the next 50 years than there are now, which means all the aid and all the improvement will probably be for naught. Well, there's still opposition to women's health services, I'll put it at that, but they have a high rate of AIDS. About 15% of South Africans have HIV, and so there's a big effort to get the women to take charge of their bodies and keep themselves safe. But again, many have 5, 6, 8 children, and so then what do you do? Even if there's some political independence in South Africa, you still have a great amount of unemployment, and even a man like this has spent his years working in the mines for very little money. He's probably getting laid off now. Again, in the business news, the Anglo-American mining company has laid off 85,000 people this week, meaning they're shutting down the mines in South Africa. It's already declined considerably over the last couple of decades, where South Africa used to produce most of the gold in the world. Now it's a minor supplier. Also, diamonds are down. And what little work there is actually less now. So it keeps a lot of South African blacks in, let's say, ever worse conditions, and they cannot break out of this cycle of poverty just because of the population and the economic problems. So here's a woman that used to work in a white house, Afrikaner's house. Now she's the same position in a middle-class black family in Johannesburg. So they say there's a growing middle class, how many, 4 or 5 million, but there's 6 to 10 million more impoverished in the same just decade or so. But at least there's freedom of travel, more educational opportunities, some intermixing, but these kids probably have less opportunity than their own parents did. And places like Johannesburg are rife with crime because there's all these people still coming in, especially from out of the country, and it's still sort of an armed camp in the major economic city of South Africa. It's been called a combination of Monte Carlo and Sodom and Gomorrah. It's considered a very dangerous town to even go to. Meanwhile, what they call the Afrikaners, the white Africans, they consider themselves Africans, having come from Holland and over 300 years ago. They thought this was the land that God gave them before it had many of the Bantu blacks that came in after them. And they're also Calvinists and very religious traditionally. But this picture reminds me of what Jomo Kenyatta said, when the missionaries arrived, they brought the Bible and we had the land. They taught us to pray with our eyes closed. When we opened our eyes, they had the land and we had the Bibles. Well, anyway, it's still a very religious country in many ways, but the Afrikaners feel very much that this is their land and they've been deprived of now their rights, and they're actually leaving in great numbers. And the population of Afrikaners is actually declining as they choose to emigrate. And they say the main question is, with this current government, is what is the price of an air ticket to Australia? So the prosperous Afrikaners and English and other European dissenters still have a strong place in the economy, as typified by this development, if you ever have been there. Sun City, which is out near Pretoria, and this was a whites-only resort because they couldn't travel off to other places during apartheid, so they made their own great play center there. But the wave is moving in the other direction now. It's still there if you get a chance to go see it. And there's a lot of, let's say, better understanding, such as can be, between the Afrikaners, the other whites, and the various blacks in the country, and intermingling friendships that were never allowed before, and even more so intermarriage, which will then bond the races together. And so that's modern South Africa. Now, again, I said we're in KwaZulu-Natal. This is far from the Cape and even the capital. But the first place we're going is up at, landing at Richards Bay, and then going up to Lake St. Lucia. And this is an industrial port and a fairly small city, but the reason we're going there is because you can go up into that beautiful natural reserve. We'll land right at an industrial dock in the small city, and then take a drive through town. There are a couple of different tours that go to see a few things, but you'll be particularly notice that we're with a lot of heavy industry shipping, coal and other mining materials that come out from the countryside. And then we go through that. There's a vast areas of tree farms because the old growth forest was cut a long time ago. Now they're growing pines and teak and different things in vast numbers. This is on the way to St. Lucia, which is a vast preserve that is the highlight of this area. It has flocks of flamingos, and then you go on a boat through the marshlands up into the larger lake. Here's a picture I took of the blue heron. You'll see fish eagles fishing in the river and the lake. And I caught a glimpse of a kingfisher up there. There's quite a bit of bird life in there. Here's the lilac-breasted roller, which is only in South Africa. And it's sort of iridescent feathers. And then there are friends, the crocodiles. So here's your first warning, no swimming. And you know, how do you make an alligator laugh? You pull its leg and run. And you do not throw stones at crocodiles. Okay, then the other question is, why don't crocodiles like fast food? Because they can't catch it. And go to the old familiar one, what do you call a crocodile that's also a lawyer? A litigator. Well, there's a lot more like that. All right, you want one more? What happens when a crocodile becomes a politician, becomes a delegator? I don't know. It seems like you're ready for it. What's the difference between a dog and a crocodile? One's bark is worse than his bite. All right, enough of that. But then we have the hippopotami, which are the featured animal up in the Great Lake up there. And they are on land sometimes in the dry season, but in in the wet season, they stay in the water all the time, and they have herds, and the boats go right around up to them, so you can look them right in the eye. But of course, they'll defend the male bulls are quite ferocious. And of course, so what's their favorite music? The hippopotamus. Hippopo. All right, let me see. And then, how do you get a hippopotamus to obey your commands? Through hypnosis. And what do you call a hippo that tells lies? A hypocrite. All right, enough of that. Well, anyway, all these areas in South Africa and up into the inlands, Mozambique and Zimbabwe, have been trying to set up larger game parks, not parks, those are near crowded areas, but reserves. And a lot of them are what they call trans-border. For instance, the Kruger National Park has a matching one now in Mozambique, and there are other ones that are shared with Namibia and other countries so that they try to, let's say, extend the area where there's truly the last of the wildlife from this otherwise larger and ever larger human population. So from either Richards Bay or Maputo or Durban, that's where you go to the greatest of the South African parks, Kruger National Park. I'm sure some of you have been there. And I leave that to your safari to find out more about it. But this is, of course, one of the great reasons we come here to see this magnificent wildlife. And rather than give you any more scientific information, I'll just tell you the story, which is a great bull elephant was stomping in the bush out there and is about to step on a mouse. And the question is, how did the mouse make the bull elephant laugh? It cried up, "Don't step on me." And the bull elephant looked down and said, "Oh, why?" He said, "I'm pregnant and it's yours." Well, unfortunately, for lack of good humor, these elephants are often being poached. And again, that's the terrible news. All these numbers of the wildlife are declining significantly. So this is in Kruger Park, where they often have an overpopulation that run out into the farmlands and then are then poached by the local peoples to get them out of the fields. And so they have a program of relocation where they will anesthetize an elephant and pick it up, take it to another park where there are not so many. But this is the real problem, because they're often just killed for their tusks, and this is a trade that is the tragedy of the era. I mean, it was a traditional trade, but now they're getting down to the last herds, and even in some of these parks, they're getting down to the last elephants and other, like rhinos and others. But there's considerable effort internationally and locally to try to keep this, because, of course, it is a major earner of tourism income for all these areas. And even the zebras have been declining often it's because of drought and areas that they don't migrate enough to find a new area with changes in the ecology. But even the zebras have been called the symbol of South Africa, which has been, Mandela called it the Rainbow Nation, but somebody said, no, it's actually the Zebra Nation, because even though we are of different colors on our skin, we are the same and have to work together to have our life together. And so the wildlife hopefully will survive the human follies of the era. And you can see it as you go out to the area. Here's a cheetah up in the tree. And you'll see a lot of the giraffes, which have been called the most graceful animal on earth. And one of the megafauna that people admire the most, because they're so stately in their manner. Curiously, they make no sound. They don't cry, they don't complain, they don't whine, they don't roar either. And they are in groups together and very social. You don't see anybody but a lone bull out there. And because of their long neck, they can keep an eye out on the whole area where they are, and they're up above everybody else, and they can kick with their hooves to stomp on anything. Only toll on giraffes is the newborn. About half of the freshly born giraffes are attacked by lions. And these sort of horns on the top of their head is a sign of age and majesty. And so the bull giraffes, the males, grow higher horns, and they stand up higher above everybody else, and the young ones have to sort of show some submission. This is one we saw in Mombasa, which this is an elderly male who is particularly what they call ossification, not really horns because they don't break through the skin, but this is a sign of being the lead in the senior male giraffe. Say, this is where he will pick up one of the females, and of course, how do giraffes make love? Well, they start by necking, and then she gets to feel his bumps. So this is just the way they are. But some of the recent research on giraffes has said that they have a very unusual cardiovascular system because they're so tall and their legs and such are so far, they have extra strong arteries and veins to be able to maintain blood pressure. And they have up to 5 times the blood pressure of a human. And so even this example, giraffe will dip down 20 feet to take a drink of water, then pick its head up. And now that, if we tried that, we might faint for going so far, but they have a very powerful heart and circulatory system to sort of extend their health all through such an elongated body. Well, now I'm going to just go on to Durban, which is, of course, down the coast. And this is the largest city of South Africa, other than Johannesburg. It's larger than Cape Town. And this was the major port for all of the cotton and other minerals and other export items. So it's very well developed and has a multicultural, diverse population. We will be docking right downtown on the point, right at the corner on the right side. You could walk into town, but it's a bit of a way, and there'll be a shuttle bus down to the shopping centers right in the center of the city. And so this is a very compact urban center, has a whole beachfront, some beaches on the outside of the harbor, I should say, and a center commercial district that's not unlike any city in the world these days. This is the monument to Vasco da Gama given by the Portuguese government near the docks. And then the Victorian-style city hall right in the center business district. Now, I took this picture because it has a World War I commemoration, tell it to the generations following. Except a corn of wheat fall unto the ground and die, it abideth alone, but if it die, it bringeth forth much fruit. And so Durban is first of all, an English town that brought in Indians to work. There's a large Muslim community, and let's say it's a comprehensive city. It has this Howard College and a lot of educational facilities that are now open to everybody. The most famous resident, though, of Durban in modern times is Mahatma Gandhi, and you can read his writing there. He was a lawyer in Durban, and that's where he began his movement for non-discrimination, then eventually went back to India, as you saw in the movie. But his writing here is, God is truth, the way to truth lies through ahimsa, which is nonviolence. And that was the principle that he followed through his life, and that has caused many to follow his teachings since. But it's all mixed in Durban. You have a large Muslim community. It's a banking center, commercial center, so it has a modern downtown, and then resorts out along the beaches. One of the excursions, I believe, is to this excursion out here, which is a beautiful beach area to the south of Durban. And so it's an urban experience, but if you take one of those trips outside the vast city that it is now with a lot of suburban development, including this new mall, which is just being built in a sort of a Victorian style, then you go up into the hills where they have a big stadium. That's probably the one common religion of all of Durban, their new football stadium. But if you just walk around downtown, you see it's sort of a compact walking area with all these different peoples. And there is a African market that is past what they call the Victoria market, and it's an outdoor stalls of a lot of Zulu arts and crafts. These are springbok manes that is a traditional headdress for men. You'd all look good in that, wouldn't you? And then they have the herb market. I don't know if it'll be open because it's sort of seasonal, but this is the African herbal, the Sangoma women run this with all kinds of barks and animal parts for various incantations and whatever ails you. And this is where it all comes from, the deep far back of Zulu Natal, KwaZulu Natal. And so there's this deep interior that the culture comes from, but it comes right down to Durban, and you can see it just walking downtown off the ship. And so I just say this part of South Africa is has very strong contrasts and has let's say the urban contemporary culture, and then upland you get the wildlife. So here's another question: how can't find my jokes. You can make this one. How do you make a lion laugh? Run. All right. And here you go. Why are lions religious? Because they pray together as a family. All right. And why are lions not allowed in the casinos? Because they might be cheetahs. Oh, well. Now, you all remember the song, which was originally a Zulu song. I know you've practiced these songs before, but let's try this one all together now. In the jungle, the mighty jungle, the lion sleeps tonight. In the jungle, the mighty jungle, the lion sleeps tonight. A wing a whack, a wing a whack, a wing a whack, et cetera, et cetera. So actually that is a traditional lullaby in Zulu that was taken and of course ended up in many versions around the world, and it's the single largest royalty earner of any song in the world other than Happy Birthday. And Pete Seeger, the American folk singer, pressed the publishing companies to find the original writer of it, which they finally found in Johannesburg playing in a band. And even though he didn't get to see any of his money, his family, who were living with no electricity or plumbing, finally got the royalties, and now they're living in one of the palaces along the rest of President Zuma's entourage. But that song is well famous. But never wake a sleeping lion because he might be hungry. And with that, thank you very much and have a good time in South Africa and Mozambique.